Amendment resolution. I tell you, this past session, one of my seatmates, Greg Walker from down in Columbus, Indiana, we had some good talks. We're sitting there visiting. We're talking about what's coming down from the federal government and saying, you know what, this isn't right. I mean, the states form the federal government, not the federal government forming the states. And it seems like those in Washington have forgotten that. And they think that they can dictate to all the states what type of legislation, whether it's welfare programs, whether it's education programs. They're forgetting about local control. They're forgetting about the state's responsibilities in all of this. And so he was on the internet, and we saw a couple of other states saying, let's pass resolutions to send to Washington, reminding them of the rights and the responsibilities of the state. So we passed the 10th Amendment resolution in the state Senate. Now, we have tomorrow night, down in Kendallville, they are going to pass a resolution from the city level asking the state again to pass the 10th Amendment resolution, and we're going to try to start a grassroots campaign of cities, of towns, of any council that's willing to pass that resolution to show support that it's grassroots, that people want to go back to local control. They believe that federal government is reaching too far into our lives and that people are paying attention. And so tomorrow night, Kendallville is going to be one of the first ones to pass that resolution at the city level. And I hope that it goes from Elkhart to Goshen to Crawfordsville to Beacon. And we need to send that message back to Washington that states and the local control is more important, because what's good for us may not always be good for another part of the country, another part of the state even. We can do a better job of educating our children. We can do a better job of meeting the needs that we have in our communities. And so as we work through those, we have a lot of challenges, not only at the state level, but also we start talking about this next election, and Christy and I, we kind of got to that tipping point again, like we did back right after 9/11. And we got through the last election, and we said, where do we go now? What is the next, we were worried about the 50 years back right after 9/11. Well, right now, I'm more concerned about the next 10 years. I'm worried about the next 5 years. I mean, my kids, our kids, are going to have to deal with a debt that we can't even imagine. Christy and I, we were traveling home on the toll road one night, and I forgot my iPass, and so I looked over at her and I said, Christy, I said, I need some cash. She kind of gives me that funny look like, you never give me any. And so I said, well, I need some cash to get off the toll road. And she said, well, I don't have any. I said, you know what, Peyton's got 20 bucks in his wallet in the back seat. I said, can you grab his money out of his wallet? And the look that my wife gave me was one I'll never forget. It's like, how dare you take your son's money? And I said, I promise I'll pay him back as soon as we get home, and which I did. And but what that reminds me of is that right now, federal government is reaching into your pocket, into our children's pocket, into our grandchildren's pocket, and they're weakening this economy, they're weakening this country day after day after day without any plan to pay this back. And we've got to step up and say, no more spending, no more earmarks, get control of yourself, because you're going to destroy the country economically, in which we're seeing these signs already. We don't need another bailout. We need maybe Evan buyout. We were running late because we were trying to find a parking space and we couldn't drag it in here fast enough. But I think it's so important right now that our senators, our congressmen, that let us know you're listening to us. Let us know you're coming back home and you're fighting for us. Because right now, I just feel like they're not paying attention. They're doing what they want to do. I mean, honestly, folks, Senator Bayh has been he's been in a political office basically his whole career. He's made millions of dollars while being in Washington as a public servant. That just doesn't add up to me. I mean, people are out here working hard. They're raising their family. They're trying to provide for their children's education. They're trying to make ends meet while a public servant in Washington makes millions of dollars. There's something wrong with this picture. We need to get back Two, public service, and people going back home, our representation coming back home and saying, what can we do to help? Most of the time it's like, back off, get out of the way. And when we were hitting 20% unemployment, almost 20% unemployment here in Elkhart and LaGrange County, I just wondered to myself, why can't our senators, why can't they just jump in a car rather than flying on Air Force One, come back to northern Indiana, drive around the community, find some places to go and say, what can we do to help? Senator Bayh sits on the Energy Committee. He sits on a committee that could affect good energy policy for this country. He sits on the Banking Committee. He's been through all of this about the banking disaster that has forced Freddie and Fannie Mae to give loans to people who are high risk, couldn't afford it. And if you stand by the fire long enough, it's your fire. And I think it's time that we again have that dialogue in this next election to say, Senator Bayh, what have you been doing for Hoosiers? What have you been doing to stand up and fight for us rather than, well, what are you doing? And I hear it all over the state. Christy and I and the boys, we've traveled almost 11,000 miles now around this state talking with folks as we were doing an exploratory committee. We've officially announced that we are running for the United States Senate in 2010. But we hear it over and over and over. People are saying, you know what, we can do this. Times are tough. Times are difficult right now, but all we need is just government to back off. We don't need another minimum wage increase. We don't need another mandate for health care. We don't need cap and trade, which would increase our utility costs dramatically in this state. It affects us second in the country, next to Texas, the hardest. That's how hard cap and trade legislation hits Indiana. We can't afford this government. We can't afford what they want to do in Washington because people are already stretched so thin that anything more is going to break the back of this country, and we can't handle it. And it's time again that we step up to the plate and say to Senator Bayh, to our representation in Washington, and to those around this country, I think how great of a message would it be next November. Our polls close first here in Indiana. At 6 o'clock, people around the country see that $12 million entrenched Senator Bayh is defeated in Indiana because people are deciding to send a message to Washington and say enough is enough. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think one thing that is so important that Christy and I have learned as we've been involved in politics and in government is that it takes in government, and how do we get involved? It takes a little TLC, and it may be a little funny acronym, but I think that it's important for us to remember that for us to be engaged in our government, it takes time, it takes a little bit of our loot, and it takes commitment. If we step aside a year from now, and we kind of forget about everything that's happened in the past 6 months to 8 months, from Guantanamo Bay to big bank bailouts to the healthcare debate, to cap and trade, to card check, to all of these spending programs, the bailout of post office, we're not going to be as effective as we want to be. We can't give up. We cannot let go now. I got to read you this quote that Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom." And I tell you, we can't give up. The other side does not give up. We can't give up. We're out here working hard, doing the right thing, while those in office are doing the sneaky stuff. And it's time for us to pay attention, and it's time for us to step up and be a part of the process. So thank you so much. Our campaign is going to be built from the grassroots up. We believe that if you build a strong foundation, you'll have a strong campaign. And so that's what our effort is as we travel around meeting people. We want to build that strong campaign because it needs to be from the bottom up, from the people. And we believe if we have a people-led campaign, it will be a strong campaign. Even though he's got $12 million, more than Harry Reid and Barbara Boxer combined, we can send that message because people are a part of the process, and you don't buy an election. I think one thing, we also need to lead with ideas. And, one of the things that we talk about is term limits once in a while. I tell you, there's some other ideas that we could have out here. What about saying every dollar that is raised in a campaign be spent in that campaign? You can't carry it over from election to election because, Senator Bayh raised a lot of money because he was going to run for president. Well, then all of a sudden he decides he's not going to run for president, but he has all of this money that he transfers into a U.S. Senate campaign again. People didn't give it to him for that. They gave it to him because he was going to run for president. You know, let's stop this. That's when they get comfortable, when they don't have to come back home because they feel like, hey, I got $12 million, I can run this campaign through the air, you know, TV, radio, all these things. Instead of coming back home, they get comfortable. How about doing something like that? Let's say, hey, let's see if people will actually give you money for the next election instead of you carrying it over from year to year and getting it all from these special interests and lobbyists. And, you know, Senator buys money out of the $12 million, about $8 million of it comes from out of state of Indiana. So